My name is Lucinda Vale, and at 70, I thought I'd learned how to tell the difference between worry and instinct. Worry hums quietly in your chest. Instinct hits like a wave, cold, fast, and absolute. That morning driving north with my husband Gareth, it struck so suddenly, I nearly lost my breath. The highway stretched ahead of us, gray ribbon through the pines. Gareth hummed along with the radio, one hand loose on the wheel. The air smelled of coffee and late spring rain. We were finally taking a small family trip again, our first in months, since Corinne, our daughter, had started keeping her distance. When she'd called last night, cheerful and warm, I'd taken it as a good sign. She'd even dropped off a small blue overnight bag for Elias, our grandson. Just his pajamas and some toys, she'd said, with that bright, almost overdone smile that mothers recognize but pretend not to question. The bag sat now behind my seat, a harmless little thing made of soft fabric and stitched initials. I remember glancing at it as the morning light shifted through the trees. Something about it felt heavier than it should. Gareth must have noticed my silence because he reached over, brushing my knuckles with his thumb, the way he always did when he sensed my thoughts were running. "Cold?" he asked. I shook my head, but my throat had tightened. The hum of the tires grew louder, every vibration crawling up my spine. I looked out the window. The highway sign for Plattsburgh flashed by. We were less than an hour from the Canadian border. That was when my pulse began to race. No reason, no proof, just a deep, rising certainty that if we kept driving, something terrible would happen. Gareth said softly at first, then louder. "Turn the car around." He didn't question me. After 50 years together, he didn't need to. His jaw tightened as he checked the mirror and swung the wheel, taking the next exit without a word. The moment the car veered off the northbound lane, the air changed. My hands stopped trembling, but my heart didn't. The blue bag sat unmoving behind me, quiet and patient, as if it knew we were coming back for the truth. We pulled onto a narrow country road lined with birch trees. Gareth didn't ask where I wanted to go. He just drove until the highway was far behind us, and the sound of passing trucks faded into still air. When he finally stopped near a turnout overlooking the river, I could hear the ticking of the engine and the faint, uneven rhythm of my breathing. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The car smelled faintly of pine, and the coffee we'd picked up hours earlier, now cold in its cup holder. My gaze slid again to the back seat. The blue bag sat exactly where Corinne had placed it that morning, straps neatly folded, zipper closed. I had packed hundreds of overnight bags for my daughter over the years, school trips, college weekends away, but never had one of them felt like this. Heavy, watching. Gareth cleared his throat softly. "You want to tell me what's going on?" I opened my mouth, then stopped. How could I explain that I didn't know? That all I had was a sensation, a pulse in my stomach that told me danger was closer than reason could measure. "She called last night," I said finally. Her voice, it was different. He nodded, eyes still on the windshield. Different, how I replayed it in my mind. Corinne's bright tone, the forced laughter. "Hey, Mom, just a few things for Elias." "Okay." He's so excited about the trip. It had been late. She'd spoken too quickly, almost rehearsed. I'd wanted to ask what was wrong, but I hadn't wanted to ruin the fragile peace between us. After all these months of tension, I'd taken her cheerfulness as a small miracle. Now, sitting in that parked car, I realized how badly I'd wanted to believe her. I turned slightly, watching Gareth's reflection in the glass. His calm was his armor. It had steadied me for decades. But behind that calm, I could see worry forming a slow tightening around his eyes. He trusted my instincts always had, but he also trusted facts, and right now I had none. "Maybe I'm overreacting," I said, though my voice didn't sound like mine. Gareth reached over and rested his hand on mine. "You don't spook easy loose. If something feels wrong, we check. Simple as that." I looked down at our hands, his larger lined from years of drafting plans and fixing things that broke, mine trembling against his. I wanted to tell him to open the bag to look for me, but part of me was afraid of what we might find. I thought of Corinne that morning. She'd shown up early, hair still damp from the shower, wearing that powder blue coat I'd given her last Christmas. There was something fragile in the way she hugged me, too long, too tight. When she stepped back, her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Just a few things for Elias," she'd said again, handing me the bag. "I figured it'd be easier if you carried it. Yours has more room." At the time, I'd smiled back, grateful for any trace of warmth. Now the memory burned. I turned in my seat, staring at the bag until my vision blurred. The zipper glinted under the weak sunlight silver teeth, waiting to be pulled apart. My throat tightened. What kind of mother fears her own child's touch? Gareth must have seen something in my face, because he quietly said, "We'll figure it out together, whatever it is." I nodded, but my words caught in my chest. I didn't tell him that deep down I already knew. There was something inside that bag that wasn't meant to cross a border or maybe even to see daylight. The river below us shimmered with the pale light of noon. A single bird wheeled through the sky, its shadow slicing across the windshield before disappearing into the trees. Gareth turned the key, starting the engine again. "Let's head home," he murmured. As the car rolled forward, I kept my eyes on the bag, its quiet weight pressing against the back of my seat, like a heartbeat that wasn't mine. The drive back toward Albany was silent, except for the faint hum of tires against asphalt. I kept my hands folded in my lap, though they wouldn't stop shaking. The air inside the car felt too still, too thick. Every few minutes, my eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, drawn again to the soft blue bag resting behind me. Gareth glanced over once, then twice, saying nothing. His profile was stone steady. Familiar, the face that had seen me through childbirth funerals and every quiet disaster in between. But I could feel the weight of his worry pressing against the air between us. When we reached a rest area off the main road, he pulled in without a word. Pines bordered the lot, whispering in the light wind. A family with a camper van parked nearby, their children laughing over melting ice cream cones. The sound felt cruelly normal. "I'll stretch my legs," Gareth said softly, already stepping out. He knew me well enough to give me space. I waited until his footsteps faded, then turned in my seat and unbuckled my belt. The bag's zipper gleamed in the weak afternoon sun. My fingers hovered over it, heart thudding so hard it seemed to echo through the car. I told myself I was being foolish, that it was just clothes and toys, maybe a misplaced book. Still, I slid the zipper open slowly, the sound cutting through the silence like a blade. Inside, at first glance, everything looked ordinary. Elias's pajamas folded neatly, a small storybook, a bright red toy car resting on top. I reached in to lift it out, and that's when I saw it. Beneath the thin layer of fabric, wrapped tightly in clear plastic, were small, rectangular packets, 3, maybe 4, tucked deep at the bottom. Each the size of a paperback, sealed and heavy. For a second, my mind refused to name what my eyes recognized. Then the world tilted. I pulled one out far enough to see the corner clearly. No labels, no markings. Just the kind of packaging I'd seen on evening news reports, the kind that made officers wear gloves. My throat went dry. I dropped it back into the bag and pressed both hands to my face. The smell of laundry detergent and plastic mingled with a faint chemical tang. It was unmistakable. My daughter had used me, used my car, my trust, my love as a vessel. When Gareth returned, I was still gripping the open bag. He saw my expression, followed my gaze, and went still. Without a word, he reached over, gently closed the zipper, and placed his hand over mine. "Lucinda," he said quietly, and there was something in his voice I'd never heard before. Rage contained by sheer will. "We're going home." I nodded, but tears blurred the world into shapes and shadows. She wouldn't. I began, then stopped. Even to my own ears it sounded weak. She did. He said simply, his jaw tight. And we'll deal with it. He turned the car back toward the highway, the movement precise, controlled. I could feel anger radiating off him, the kind of fury that comes not from hatred, but heartbreak. As we merged into traffic, I pressed my palm against my chest, trying to steady the tremor inside me. The idea that my daughter, the child I'd raised to say please and thank you, who'd once cried when she accidentally broke a window, could place me in such danger it didn't fit inside my understanding of her. Outside, the trees blurred into streaks of green and gold. The bag sat in the back seat, sealed once more, looking as harmless as a child's memory. I stared straight ahead, feeling something inside me crack in two. Love on one side, the truth on the other. And I knew as surely as I knew my own name that nothing between those two things would ever fit the same way again. We drove on, neither of us speaking. The sun dipped lower behind the trees, its light thin and brittle. And in the back seat, that small blue bag, the one Corinne had handed me with a smile, seemed to pulse with a quiet, terrible life of its own. Before that day on the highway, before the blue bag and the silence that followed, there had been 5 long years of saying yes. It started with a phone call. I can still replay word for word. Corinne's voice had trembled in a way I hadn't heard since she was a teenager. "Mom, they let me go," she said. "The company's shutting down the whole department." At 42, she'd been an event coordinator for a hotel in Schenectady, good at it too. She was always the one who could calm chaos with a clipboard and a smile. But when the hotel changed ownership, her position vanished overnight. "It's just temporary," she promised. "I'll find something soon." Of course I believed her. What mother doesn't? The first check I wrote was small, just enough to cover her car payment. A bridge, I told myself. A few months later, she called again. Her voice, softer, guiltier. "Mom, rent's due. I've got interviews lined up, I swear. Could you help this?" Once I said yes. When Elias started daycare, she said the hours were too short to manage new work. Another yes. When the heating bill came and the landlord raised rent, I didn't hesitate. "It's just until you're back on your feet," I said, handing over another envelope, pretending not to see Gareth's quiet sigh as he watched from the kitchen table. By the 3rd year, my husband had started keeping 2 budgets ours and the one I sent to Corinne. I pretended not to notice. Every time he tried to talk about it, I met him with the same phrase. "She's our child, Gareth. What are we supposed to do? Let her drown?" He never argued. He'd just reach for my hand, tired eyes full of worry, and say, "Just don't let her take you down with her." But I was already knee-deep in the water, too. Sure, I could hold both of them up. The more I gave, the less she thanked me. Gratitude faded into expectation, and expectation hardened into routine. The calls stopped being requests and became reminders. The insurance is due, she'd text. They raised tuition again. Every month a new reason. Every time another yes. Some nights I'd look at the ledgers and feel Gareth's hand resting gently on my shoulder. "You know," he'd say, "we could travel next spring. Remember the cabin in Maine?" I'd nod, smile, and then quietly move the money elsewhere. Our retirement goals shrank as Corinne's needs grew. I told myself love was sacrifice, and mothers don't stop loving when it's inconvenient. But somewhere between the 3rd and 4th year, the tone of her voice changed. She no longer sounded embarrassed when she asked. She sounded entitled, almost impatient. And still I said yes. I told myself it was what any good mother would do. I told myself she just needed time. But time passed, and I realized too late that what I was giving her wasn't help anymore. It was permission. Permission to depend, to demand, and finally to betray. By the time the 5th year arrived, I was so used to saying yes that the word no barely existed in my mouth. It wasn't one fight that broke us down. It was the quiet accumulation of small ones, half-finished conversations over breakfast, unspoken resentment, simmering beneath every envelope I mailed. By the second year of helping Corinne, Gareth had started keeping a notebook in the kitchen drawer. Every few weeks, I'd see him take it out after dinner, his pen moving slowly, his lips pressed thin. One evening, curiosity overcame me. I glanced over his shoulder and saw tidy columns of numbers: mortgage, utilities, Corinne; rent, Corinne; insurance, Corinne; daycare. He noticed me watching. "I'm not keeping score," he said gently. "I just need to know how much longer we can manage this." "She'll pay us back," I replied too quickly. "She just needs stability." He set the pen down and looked at me. Really looked. "Stability isn't something you can buy for someone else, Luce." I wanted to argue, but I couldn't. So instead, I washed the dishes one by one, the clink of porcelain against metal, filling the silence between us. Corinne's calls came like clockwork after that. No more apologies, no hesitations, just lists. "Daycare's gone up again. The car needs tires. Elias has a school trip." Her tone carried no malice, only certainty, as if my help was simply another monthly bill that life demanded. The first time she forgot to say thank you, I noticed. The third time, I pretended I didn't. Gareth began withdrawing from the conversations altogether. When I'd hang up, his eyes would follow me quietly across the room, full of concern he no longer voiced. Once he said, "You're doing more parenting now than you did when she was a child." His words stung because they were true. Still, every time I questioned myself, I'd hear Elias's voice in the background of those phone calls, his bright little laugh as he called Grandma. And that was enough to still my doubts. I told myself I wasn't helping Corinne anymore. I was helping him. On weekends, when she dropped him off, he'd run straight into my arms, hair smelling of sunshine and playground dust. He'd chatter about his week, show me drawings, build towers on the living room rug. When he laughed, the sound filled every empty corner of the house. Sometimes Gareth would watch us from the porch, smiling, though I could see the sadness in it. After Elias went to bed, he'd say softly, "He's the reason you keep doing it, isn't he?" I never answered. He didn't need me to. Somewhere along the way, I stopped noticing how much I was spending or what we were losing. The savings account we'd built over 40 years grew thinner. Vacations disappeared from our calendar. But I told myself it was fine, money was replaceable. Family wasn't. And yet, a small, persistent ache had begun to take root in me, the kind that came from loving without balance. Each check I signed carried less warmth. Each conversation with Corinne, a little more distance. Gratitude had vanished, replaced by expectation, and still, I called it devotion. Looking back, that was the cruelest illusion of all, that kindness given long enough could substitute for love that had stopped being returned. Elias's laughter had a way of softening the edges of everything. No matter how heavy the week felt, how strained the phone calls with Corinne became the moment he burst through our front door, the air seemed to lighten. He always arrived with his tiny backpack and that little red toy car clutched in his hand, a plastic thing worn smooth from being carried everywhere. "Grandma, it's still fast," he'd announce proudly, running it along the hallway floor, the wheels squeaking faintly. I'd pretend to be amazed every time gasping when it zoomed across the rug, though I could see the chip in one wheel that kept it veering slightly left. He'd giggle and fix it with the patience only a child could muster. Weekends with him became our rhythm. Saturday mornings meant pancakes and cartoons. After breakfast, Gareth would take him to the park while I packed a little basket juice crackers and the small blanket Elias called his racetrack. I'd watch them from the porch sometimes, Gareth's tall frame bending to match his grandson's stride, the toy car rattling in Elias's pocket with every step. At the park, Elias would set up his races on the bench beside me. "This one's you, Grandma," he'd say, pointing to the scuffed red car. "You always win." Then he'd choose a slower car for himself, making dramatic engine noises pretending to lose, and cheering anyway. I don't think he realized that watching him was the only victory I ever needed. Corinne would call sometimes during those afternoons, her tone clipped efficient. "He's being good, right?" "You're not spoiling him," she'd say. Half joking, half accusing. I'd smile into the phone, ignoring the chill in her voice. "He's fine, sweetheart. Just playing with his cars." There was always a pause after that, a silence that used to be filled with warmth. I'd wait for her to ask how I was, but she never did. When the call ended, I'd tuck the phone away and focus on Elias's chatter, letting his small voice drown out the ache her absence left. At night, I'd read him stories, the same few picture books he never tired of. He'd curl up against me, the toy car, tucked safely under his pillow, as if even in sleep he needed to know it was near. Sometimes he'd whisper questions that broke my heart in ways he didn't understand. "Grandma, why's Mommy so tired all the time? Does she still like pancakes?" I'd stroke his hair and tell him yes, she did, that she loved him more than anything. It wasn't a lie exactly. But the truth was, harder, his mother's exhaustion had turned into distance, and distance into something colder. When Corinne came to pick him up Sunday evenings, she was always in a rush. "Thanks, Mom," she'd say, leaning into the doorway, but never stepping fully inside. Her eyes would flick to the toy car in Elias's hand, then away, as if it reminded her of something she couldn't face. The last time she left, she barely waited for him to buckle his seatbelt before driving off. I stood on the porch, waving as the car disappeared down the street, the sound of the little toy wheels still echoing faintly in my mind. That night when I was cleaning the guest room, I found a second toy car under the pillow, a blue one forgotten. I placed it on the nightstand beside the framed photo of us at the park, unaware that in the months to come, that small red car in his pocket would return to me in a way I could never have imagined. The conversation began innocently enough, an early January afternoon snow, brushing the windows, the world wrapped in soft quiet. I was folding laundry when the phone rang. Corinne's name flashed on the screen, and a little knot of hope tightened in my chest. Maybe she wanted to talk about Elias, or simply to check in. Those were the calls I missed most, the ordinary ones. "Mom," she began brightly, "I've found something amazing for Elias. You're going to love this." Her voice carried that practiced excitement I used to hear when she was pitching ideas at work. I smiled, despite myself. "Tell me." "It's a private academy," she said, her tone quick, almost rehearsed. "Small classes, personal tutoring, strong anti-bullying programs. He'd thrive there. They even have robotics workshops for his age group." "It sounds wonderful," I said, and I meant it. Anything that might give Elias a better start felt worth listening to. Corinne didn't pause. "The spring term starts soon. If we enroll him now, he can stay straight through elementary. I just need a little help covering the tuition." How much I asked, though. Some part of me already feared the answer. She hesitated just long enough to make me uneasy. $15,000 for this semester, she said, then rushed on. "It goes up to 18 for the next full year, but that includes everything. Books, activities, uniforms. It's really not bad." My heart sank. $18,000. I pressed my palm against the table as if to steady it. "That's a lot, Corinne." "I know," she said quickly. "But this is about his future. You always told me education is an investment." I tried to keep my voice even. "It is. But that kind of money would mean cutting into our retirement savings. Maybe we could look at scholarship programs or Mom." She interrupted sharp enough to slice through my sentence. "He's being bullied. Public school isn't safe anymore. This would solve that." Her words hit me in the softest place, fear for a child. Still, something didn't add up. Elias had never mentioned trouble at school. When I'd picked him up last weekend, he was laughing with friends, proud of the snowman they'd built during recess. "Is he all right?" I asked. "He never said anything about that." Her voice softened almost too much. He doesn't want to worry you. He tells me things he can't tell anyone else. I wanted to believe her, but a faint doubt began to stir. Let me think about it, I said slowly. There was a long pause. So that's a no. No, I replied carefully. That's me being responsible. Let's talk to his teacher first. Maybe there are options we haven't considered. Another silence, this one longer, colder. When she finally spoke again, her tone had changed completely. You always say family comes first, Mom. I just didn't realize that meant your savings came before your grandson. Corinne, I said softly. It's not about that. I just need time to look. But the line went dead before I finished. I sat at the kitchen table, phone still pressed to my ear, staring at the frost gathering on the window pane. In 50 years of marriage and 70 years of living, I'd learned that silence has many shapes, some heavy with grief, others sharp with anger. This one was both. When Gareth came in, shaking snow from his coat, he stopped short at the sight of my face. She asked for something again, I nodded. Private school, 18,000. He exhaled slowly, setting his gloves on the counter. And you said I hesitated only a moment. No. His eyes softened with relief. Then let her be upset. Maybe she'll finally learn to stand on her own. I wanted to believe that, but as the evening light faded, a tightness settled in my chest. I thought of Corinne's voice, how quickly warmth had turned to ice, and realized something small but final had shifted between us. That night I couldn't sleep. The house felt different, echoing in a way it hadn't before. Somewhere beyond our quiet street, the phone that had once been my lifeline to my daughter now sat in her hands silent as the snow falling outside. It didn't happen all at once. The distance crept in slowly, quiet, as frost spreading across glass. The weekend after our argument, Corinne texted that Elias had caught a cold. We'll come by next week, she said. Her tone was polite, detached, the kind of message you'd send to a stranger you still owed a favor. The next weekend, she said he had a birthday party. Then homework. Then nothing at all. Each time I told myself it was temporary. She just needed space. People cool off, then come back. Mothers believe that it's how we survive heartbreak. But the weeks stretched on. Calls went unanswered, messages sat unread. Gareth would look at me across the dinner table and say gently, maybe give her time. I'd nod, though something inside me whispered that time was exactly what she was using to build the wall higher. By February, the house felt too quiet. The toy cars still sat in a small bowl on the sideboard, one red, one blue, like little ghosts of laughter. I started baking on weekends, as if the smell of cinnamon rolls might somehow reach my grandson through the air. I'd make a dozen, then wrap them carefully and leave them in the freezer. They're still there, lined like promises I never got to keep. One afternoon, after 3 weeks of silence, I drove to the grocery store to keep busy. The aisles were nearly empty, just the soft murmur of carts rolling over linoleum. I was reaching for a carton of milk when I heard Elias's laugh. That sound. I would have known it anywhere. I turned, and there he was at the end of the aisle, clutching a cereal box, grinning up at Corinne. His hair was longer, his cheeks rounder. For a second, everything inside me lifted. Elias, I called softly, not wanting to startle them. He looked up, saw me, and his whole face lit up. He dropped the box and ran straight into my arms. I felt his small body press against me, warm and real. Grandma, I missed you. I didn't realize I was crying until I felt the wetness on his shoulder. I missed you too, sweetheart, I whispered, kissing his hair. Then Corinne's voice cut through the moment, sharp, too loud for the quiet aisle. Elias, come on. He hesitated, confused, clinging tighter. But I want to show Grandma now, she said, her hand gripping his arm. She pulled him back, her expression taut, with something between anger and fear. We're late. Our eyes met for only a second. Hers were cold, unreadable. She didn't say a word to me, not even hello. I wanted to ask, why? Why this? Why so cruel? But the words wouldn't come. I just stood there watching as she dragged the cart away, her son looking over his shoulder until they turned the corner and disappeared. I must have stayed there longer than I realized, because an employee came by to ask if I needed help. I shook my head, pushed my empty cart to the nearest checkout, and left without buying a thing. In the parking lot, I sat in the car and stared at the steering wheel. The world outside the windshield looked blurred as if I were underwater. I thought of that moment, my daughter's hand on her child's shoulder, her eyes fixed anywhere but on me, and something broke open inside. Gareth found me there when I finally came home, eyes swollen, groceries forgotten. He didn't ask what happened. He just sat beside me on the couch, wrapped his arm around my shoulders, and let me cry until there was nothing left to say. That night I realized what silence really was. Not the absence of sound, but the deliberate withholding of love. And Corinne had mastered it. 2 months passed without a word. By the time March came, I had almost stopped checking my phone each morning. The silence had turned from sharp to dull, like a bruise that no longer throbbed, but never quite healed. I busied myself with small things, organizing drawers, repotting plants, baking more than Gareth and I could eat. Life narrowed to quiet habits. Then one Thursday afternoon, the phone rang. I didn't recognize the number at first. When I answered and heard her voice, bright, familiar, unguarded, I froze. "Hi, Mom." Corinne's tone was cheerful, almost playful. "I was just thinking about you." For a moment, I couldn't find words. I had dreamed of this call, imagined it dozens of ways, none of them so casual. Corinne. Yes. She laughed lightly, as though nothing had happened. "How are you? How's Dad? Elias has been talking about you nonstop lately." The sound of her voice felt like sunlight on a frozen lake, beautiful, but fragile enough to break underfoot. "We're fine," I said slowly. "I've missed you both." "I know," she replied quickly, softer now. "Things got complicated for a while. I didn't handle it well. The apology, or what passed for one, caught me off guard." I pressed the phone closer. "I just want us to move past it," I said. Whatever it was. "That's exactly why I called," she said, words tumbling faster now. "Mara's cousin has this cabin up North Adirondacks area near a lake. It's gorgeous. She offered it to us for a long weekend, and I thought, maybe we could all go together. You, Dad, me, and Elias. Just a few days to relax, reset, be a family again." Mara. I hadn't heard that name in months. She was a friend of Corinne's from her old job, the kind of woman who always seemed to be juggling opportunities that never quite materialized. I remembered her sharp smile at a holiday party, once warm but watchful. Still, the invitation stirred something hopeful in me. "That sounds lovely," I said too quickly. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely." "Elias would be thrilled. He's been asking when he can see you. You wouldn't believe how much he's grown." Her voice softened again, landing precisely where she knew it would hurt and heal me at once. "You've always been our anchor, Mom. I want things to feel normal again." I sat down at the kitchen table, the edge of relief catching in my chest. "I'd love that," I whispered. "Perfect." "Let's plan for next weekend," she said. "The cabin's free then, and the weather's supposed to be beautiful. I'll handle the details. Don't worry about a thing." After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, the phone still warm in my hand. The kitchen was quiet, except for the ticking of the clock and the faint hum of the refrigerator. Gareth came in, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "Who was it, Corinne?" I said, still half in disbelief. "She wants us to go on a trip." "With Elias." He paused, studying me. Out of the blue, I nodded, smiling through tears I didn't expect. "She said she wants to reconnect." He took a slow breath, then smiled faintly. "Maybe that's good. Maybe she's ready to start over." I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to. I wanted to think that after all the silence, the hurt, the years of imbalance, we could return to something simple. A family sharing coffee on a porch, our grandson chasing fireflies, Corinne laughing beside me like she used to. That night I went through Elias's old things packing a small bag. Spare clothes, his favorite book, the red toy car he'd left behind months ago. The thought of seeing him again made my heart race with a kind of joy I hadn't felt in years. Still, as I zipped the bag closed, a faint unease stirred beneath the relief, something quiet and shapeless, like a whisper you can't quite catch. I told myself it was only caution, the remnant of old hurt. And when I finally turned out the light, I tried to silence it. Because love, once given, doesn't forget how to hope. Corinne arrived on a Thursday evening, just as the light was fading over the yard. The sky had that bruised winter color, half blue, half gold, and for a moment, standing at the door, she looked younger, like the girl who used to run up the steps after school, cheeks, flushed stories spilling out before she'd even dropped her backpack. "Mom," she said, breathless, smiling too wide. "I just wanted to drop this off before the trip." In her hands was a small blue overnight bag. The sight of it made my pulse quicken for reasons I couldn't name. "What's this, just Elias's pajamas and his favorite blanket?" she said quickly, setting it on the chair by the door. "I figured it'd be easier if you packed it with your things." Her tone was cheerful, almost rehearsed. Behind her, the porch light caught in the gold strands of her hair, but her eyes darted from the floor to my face and back again. I told myself it was just guilt over our recent silence. "That's thoughtful of you," I said, forcing warmth into my voice. "We're excited. It'll be nice to have everyone together again." "Exactly," she replied with a quick, nervous laugh. "A little fresh air, a little peace. Mara said the cabin's perfect this time of year. Her cousin keeps it stocked with everything." At the sound of that name, something in me tensed. "You've been seeing Mara again?" Corinne waved a hand. "Not much. She just helped with the arrangements. She's been amazing, actually. Took care of the deposit, coordinated everything." I nodded slowly, but her words brushed against something uneasy inside me. Corinne had never been the kind to let someone else take charge, not since she was small. "That's generous of her," I said. "It is." Her smile flickered, then steadied. "Anyway, I'll let you finish dinner. Tell Dad I said hi. I'll call tomorrow with directions." When the door closed, I stood there for a long moment, listening to the echo of her footsteps fade down the porch. The bag sat by the chair, innocent and still. Gareth came in from the kitchen, drying his hands with a dish towel. "She dropped something off. For Elias," I said. "Just his things for the weekend." He leaned down, lifted it with one hand, and grinned. "Feels heavier than pajamas." I tried to laugh, but it came out thin. "She probably packed half his toys. You know how she is. Always over-prepared," he said, setting it back down gently. "At least she's making an effort, Luce. That's what matters." I nodded, though the word effort lingered strangely in the air. After he went back to the kitchen, I found myself staring at the zipper, the neat curve of it glinting under the light. It was such a simple thing, a bag for a child's weekend away, but the longer I looked at it, the more something in me recoiled. Later that night, when Gareth was asleep, I walked back to the living room. The house was dark, except for the glow of the porch light spilling through the window. I touched the bag's handle, meaning only to move it out of the way, and froze at the faint metallic scent beneath the fabric softener and plastic. I withdrew my hand and stood still for a moment, breathing slowly until the feeling passed. Then I told myself I was imagining it, old nerves, nothing more. I turned off the light, left the bag where it was, and went to bed, promising I'd stop overthinking. But even as sleep came, I couldn't shake the faint, unsteady thought that peace, when forced, always feels heavier than it should. We left before dawn, the car packed neatly, the air still sharp with the smell of frost. Gareth drove while I sat beside him, a thermos of coffee, warming my hands. The highway was quiet, the kind of stillness that belongs to early morning hours when the world hasn't quite decided to wake. I tried to let the rhythm of the road steady me to believe this trip would be the fresh start Corinne promised. Behind me, the blue bag rested against the seat. I had told myself not to think about it, not to let last night's unease cloud what should have been a happy morning. Corinne had sounded so sincere on the phone, her laughter easy, her words soft. Just a few days together, Mom. It'll be good for all of us. I wanted that to be true. Gareth reached for my hand at one point, giving it a gentle squeeze. "You're quiet," he said. "Just tired." I lied. The sun was rising when the phone rang. The screen lit up with Corinne's name. My stomach tightened as I answered. "Mom," she said, her voice low, breathless, as if she'd been running. "You have the bag with you, right? The blue one." "Yes," I said slowly, glancing over my shoulder. "It's right here." "Why?" There was a pause, long enough for me to hear the faint hum of wind through her car. "Good. Just don't open it, okay?" I frowned. "Corinne, what are you talking about?" "Just promise me," she said too quickly. "It's important. You'll understand later." Her voice trembled on that last sentence. I sat frozen, the air between us filled with static. Gareth glanced at me, brows furrowed. "What's wrong?" he mouthed, but I couldn't answer. "Corinne," I said carefully. "You're scaring me." No, Mom, it's fine." She tried to laugh, but it cracked in the middle. "Everything's fine. Her words faltered, replaced by a shaky exhale. "I love you." It was a phrase she hadn't said in years. Not casually, not without prompting. The sound of it so sudden and deliberate made my breath catch. "Corinne," I began, but the line went dead. The silence that followed was deafening. Gareth's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "What was that about?" I couldn't speak. The warmth drained from my hands. I replayed the sound of her voice, the forced calm, the trembling breath, the unnatural sweetness in those last 3 words. "Don't open it." Outside, the landscape blurred past pale trees flickering in the cold morning light. I felt a sharp pulse of dread, as if my body knew something my mind refused to see. My fingers curled against the fabric of my coatnails, biting into my palms. She said not to open the bag. I whispered finally. Gareth's head turned, just slightly confusion in his eyes, but I was already looking behind us. The bag sat motionless straps, twisted as if someone had grabbed them too tightly. The longer I stared, the louder my heartbeat grew, until it filled the car like a second engine. The horizon ahead shimmered in the distance, but all I could feel was the chill spreading through my chest. It wasn't the air. It was something deeper, an instinct, ancient and certain, whispering that whatever waited in that bag wasn't meant for me to carry. The miles between us and the border shrank with every passing minute. Gareth hummed softly under his breath, unaware of how tightly I was gripping the armrest. My eyes kept drifting to the back seat, to the blue bag that seemed to hum with its own quiet pulse. "Don't open it," she'd said. Those words had rooted themselves in my mind, repeating with every thud of my heartbeat. The tone of her voice hadn't been a warning, it had been fear. "Gareth," I said, my voice trembling, "I think we need to stop." He looked at me quickly. "Why, I can't explain it." My fingers dug into the fabric of my coat. "Please, pull over." He didn't ask again. He eased the car onto a shoulder near a small gas station, engines from passing trucks rumbling in the distance. When we stopped, the silence was sharp enough to sting. I turned in my seat, staring at the bag. The zipper caught the sunlight, an ordinary shimmer, nothing more, and yet it felt menacing. My hands moved before my mind could stop them. "Lucinda," Gareth said softly, his voice low and steady. "You don't have to." "I do." The zipper's sound was slow, deliberate, a rasp that filled the quiet. Inside, the top layer was harmless enough, Elias's folded pajamas, a pair of socks, the small storybook I'd given him last Christmas. I reached in fingers, brushing fabric. Then I felt something stiff beneath the clothes. I pulled the pajamas aside. Neatly stacked, wrapped in layers of clear plastic, were small rectangular packages, 4 of them. Dense uniforms sealed tight. For a second, my mind refused to register what my eyes were seeing. Then the smell hit sharp chemical out of place among the softness of children's things. My throat closed. Gareth's voice came quietly behind me. "Lucinda, tell me that's not, I don't know." I whispered, though I did. Of course I did. You don't live 70 years in this world and not recognize danger when it sits in your lap, disguised as innocence. He leaned closer, his hand brushing my shoulder. His expression hardened in slow motion. First confusion, then disbelief, then fury so deep it barely found words. "Your daughter put that in our car," he said finally. I stared at the packages, my pulse hammering. A memory flashed Corinne crying in our kitchen 6 months ago, saying, "It's just temporary, Mom. Mara's helping me find side work. Don't tell Dad, he'll only worry." The way she'd avoided my eyes that night. The strange smell on her coat when she hugged me goodbye. I hadn't wanted to believe any of it meant something darker. But now sitting in that car with the evidence in front of me, it all came together like a cruel equation I'd ignored for too long. I pressed my hand against my mouth, trying to steady the shaking. "She was going to use us," I said finally. "Use me." Gareth's eyes stayed on the horizon. "To cross the border," he murmured. "She knew they'd never check your bag." The world outside the windshield blurred. The snow that had started falling looked clean, mercilessly clean. I thought of Elias's laughter, of the way Corinne had looked at me when she handed me the bag, tight smile too bright. A mother's instinct had been warning me then, and I'd buried it beneath longing. I zipped the bag shut, my hands trembling. The sound was final, like the closing of a door that would never open again. Gareth started the engine. His voice when he spoke was calm and cold. "We're going home." I nodded, staring straight ahead. The bag sat between us in the back seat, small and silent, yet heavier than anything I'd ever carried. The drive south was quiet. Outside, the sky dimmed toward gray, and every mile we put between us and that border felt like pulling away from a lifetime I no longer recognized. Somewhere deep inside, something cracked open, a grief that wasn't for my daughter's choices alone, but for the woman I had been before this moment, the one who thought love was enough to keep anyone safe. By the time we turned onto Corinne's street, the sun was already low, spilling a copper light across the quiet rows of houses. My hands rested in my lap, still trembling from the drive, though my mind had gone perfectly still. Gareth hadn't spoken for nearly an hour, but his presence beside me, solid, unmoving, was the only thing keeping me from unraveling. Corinne's house came into view at the end of the block, a neat colonial, with pale shutters and flower boxes she never watered. There were 2 cars in the driveway. One was hers. The other, I realized with a hard twist in my stomach, belonged to Mara. She was here. Gareth parked at the curb. For a moment, neither of us moved. The blue bag sat between my feet, zipped shut, a silent witness to everything that had cracked open inside our family. I took a slow breath, unbuckled my seatbelt, and stepped out. The front door opened before I reached it. Corinne stood framed in the doorway, pale and wide-eyed. "Mom," she said, voice tight, "why are you behind her?" Mara appeared, arms crossed, eyes darting past me to the car where Gareth waited. Even now, she carried herself like someone ready to lie before anyone asked a question. I set the blue bag gently on the porch. "You left this at our house," I said. My voice was calm, almost too calm. Corinne froze. For a fraction of a second, her face crumpled. Fear, guilt, disbelief, all flickering across it. "Mom, wait," she said quickly, stepping forward. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I replied. You were going to use me to move this across the border. Her mouth opened, then closed. It's not what it looks like, she whispered, her voice trembling. Mara's tone snapped sharp behind her. It was a mistake, all right. We didn't have a choice. We owe people a lot of money. They said we just had to deliver something small. Nothing that would hurt anyone. Nothing that would hurt anyone. Gareth's voice cut in from the steps. His eyes, usually so kind, had turned to steel. You would have sent your mother to prison. Corinne's hands flew to her face. I didn't think they'd... I thought it would be fine. I swear I was going to tell you. When I asked quietly, before or after the police called me from a border checkpoint, her sob broke the last bit of stillness in the air. She sank to the floor of the porch, clutching her knees, tears streaking her cheeks. Mom, please. I didn't mean I know, I said softly. And for the first time I did, I knew exactly what she meant. She hadn't meant harm, she had meant desperation. But desperation wrapped in deceit still poisons everything it touches. Mara reached for Corinne's arm, whispering something urgent. Corinne shook her off, eyes red. We can fix it, she said almost to herself. We'll give it back. There's nothing left to fix, Gareth said. I stepped forward, placing my hand over the bag one last time. I choose love for you, I said, looking at my daughter. But not at this cost. She looked up at me, eyes wide with grief, with shame, maybe with understanding. Mom. I shook my head gently. You'll need to take responsibility now. Whatever comes, it's yours to carry. The silence that followed was long and hollow. A wind moved through the street, scattering dry leaves across the porch. I turned and walked back to the car, feeling the weight of Gareth's arms steadying me as I climbed in. In the rearview mirror, I saw Corinne kneeling beside the blue bag, her shoulders shaking, Mara pacing behind her. For a fleeting moment, I wanted to go back to comfort, to forgive, to pretend. But the part of me that had always rescued her had finally gone still. As we drove away, I didn't look back again. The sun dipped below the trees, and the house behind us disappeared into the coming dark. The morning after the confrontation, the world looked the same, but I no longer did. The sunlight still filtered softly through the kitchen window, landing on the table where I used to write checks for Corinne's bills. Only now the checkbook was gone, and in its place sat a single legal pad, a pen, and a list I had written in steady, deliberate handwriting. Bank transfer, credit card authorization, insurance co-signature, emergency account. One by one, I crossed them out. The first call was to the bank. My voice didn't tremble, not once. I'd like to remove my daughter's name from all secondary accounts, I said. The woman on the other end confirmed my identity, polite but impersonal, unaware that she was severing something invisible, but vital. Next came the credit card company, then the utility payments, then the quiet email to my lawyer, a man named Robert Leland, who'd helped us with our wills years ago. Within an hour, he called back. Lucinda, he said gently, I read your message. I'll draft a formal statement for you and Gareth, something that clarifies you were unaware and uninvolved in her actions. I'll also prepare documentation removing financial access from any shared resources. It's unpleasant, but it's the right step. His tone was kind, but professional, the voice of someone who'd seen too many families come undone by love without limits. Can you come by this afternoon to sign? Yes, I said. We'll be there. When I hung up, I found Gareth standing in the doorway watching me quietly. His face was lined with exhaustion, but there was something steadier behind his eyes, something like relief. You're doing what needed to be done, he said. I keep thinking it feels cruel, I murmured. Like I'm abandoning her. He stepped closer, taking my hands in his. You're not abandoning her, Luce. You're finally letting her face herself. There's a difference. We drove to the lawyer's office after lunch. Robert greeted us in the small conference room, a tidy stack of papers laid out before him. Each document felt heavier than it should have, though it was only paper and ink. Gareth read every line. I signed with a hand that barely shook. "This will protect you," Robert said softly when we finished. "And it may in time help her understand the consequences of what she's done. But for now, you need distance, legal, financial, emotional. Give yourself permission to breathe." When we left his office, the sky had turned overcast, the kind of gray that blurs the line between afternoon and evening. I watched raindrops slide down the windshield as Gareth drove the sound rhythmic, almost cleansing. At home, I made tea and opened my journal. My handwriting wavered a little at first, then steadied. It feels like betrayal in reverse. I'm not betraying her. I'm betraying the habit of saving her, the version of myself who thought love meant shielding her from every consequence. I paused, looking at the words. They didn't comfort me, but they felt true. Gareth came into the kitchen, setting his mug beside mine. "How does it feel?" he asked quietly. I thought for a long moment. "Like standing on a shore after a long storm," I said. "Everything's still broken, but I can finally see the horizon again." He reached for my hand across the table, and for the first time in months, I let myself breathe without waiting for the next crisis to come. The line had been drawn not in anger, but in peace. And for the first time, it held. It was a gray morning when the call came, one of those colorless days when the air feels too still. I was sitting at the kitchen table, sorting through mail I no longer cared about, when the phone rang. Gareth was outside trimming the hedges, his humming faint through the glass. "Mrs. Vale." The voice on the other end was male, steady, but formal. "This is Officer Hart with the U.S. Border Patrol." My hand went cold around the receiver. "Yes," I said quietly. "I'm calling regarding your daughter, Corinne Vale, and a woman identified as Mara Quinn. They were detained early this morning at the Champlain-St. Bernard crossing, attempting to transport controlled substances into Canada. They listed you as their emergency contact." The words were calm, practiced. I listened to them as if they were describing someone else's tragedy. "I understand," I said finally. My voice sounded older, as though it belonged to someone who'd lived many lives. "Are they—" "They're safe, ma'am. In custody." There was no resistance. Safe. The word struck me as cruelly misplaced. He continued explaining the next steps, processing court appearances, options for counsel, but the details passed over me like wind through trees. I thanked him for calling, wrote down the case number on a scrap of paper, and hung up. For a long moment, I just sat there staring at my hands. They were steady. That surprised me. I'd imagined this moment countless times, the call, the confirmation, the final collapse. But when it came, there were no tears. The morning had already happened days ago on that porch, when I'd placed the blue bag at her feet. Gareth came in, wiping his hands on a towel. He took one look at my face and froze. "It's happened, hasn't it?" I nodded. "They were caught at the border." He set the towel down and crossed to me. For a moment, we just stood there, the silence between us, heavy but not unbearable. Then he placed his hand gently on my shoulder. "You did everything you could, Lucinda." I closed my eyes. That's what makes it hurt, that it was still never enough. We sat together for a long while. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling through the trees, and I thought of Corinne as a child, barefoot in the yard, hair tangled with leaves, laughing as Gareth chased her through the sprinklers. The memory was so bright, it almost hurt to hold. By evening, Officer Hart called again, with the formal confirmation charges, filed, bail denied. He spoke carefully, as if weighing each word. "I'm sorry for what you're going through, ma'am. I know this must be difficult." "Difficult?" I repeated softly. "That's one word for it." After he hung up, I went to the window. The clouds had begun to break apart, a faint strip of gold stretching across the horizon. Gareth joined me, his hand warm against mine. "She's alive," he said almost to himself. "Yes," I answered, "alive. And maybe now, accountable." The words felt heavy, but not cruel. There was no satisfaction in them, no sense of victory, only quiet, exhausted truth. Outside, the light shifted, touching the tops of the trees, turning them briefly to silver. before dusk fell again. For the first time in months, I didn't reach for the phone. There was nothing left to say. The world had already spoken. 3 days after the arrest, the call came from Child Protective Services. The woman's voice was calm, professional, but softened by experience. Mrs. Vale, since you're listed as next of kin, we'd like to discuss temporary guardianship for your grandson. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The air seemed to thin around me. Elias, I whispered, as if saying his name could summon him home again. Yes, ma'am. He's with a foster coordinator now. If you're willing, we can begin the emergency custody paperwork today. I'm willing, I said, and my voice steadied. Please bring him home. By evening, I was standing in the hallway listening to the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. When the door opened, Elias stood there smaller than I remembered, shoulders hunched under a too-big jacket clutching the stuffed bear I'd given him last Christmas. His eyes were wide, searching. Grandma, I knelt before him, arms open. You're safe now, sweetheart. He ran into my embrace, the sob that escaped him, breaking something loose in me that had been frozen for months. I held him until his breathing slowed, until his fingers relaxed their desperate grip on my sleeve. Gareth came in quietly from the porch, his face pale with both grief and relief. Hey, champ, he said gently, kneeling beside us. We've got your room all ready, even your race cars. Elias blinked up at him. The red one, too. The red one especially, Gareth said. That night, I tucked him into the guest room, the same one that had waited empty since the last time Corinne dropped him off. He kept his bear close and the small toy car on the nightstand, the paint, chipped but shining in the lamplight. The next morning began the way mornings used to. Toast, orange juice, the faint sound of the radio in the kitchen. Elias sat at the table swinging his legs, his appetite tentative but real. I packed his lunch while Gareth searched for his old chessboard in the hall closet. For a few moments, we felt like a family untouched by disaster. Later, I met with a caseworker named Nancy Reed at the courthouse. She was brisk but kind, her paperwork neat, her manner careful. It's temporary for now, she said, but given the circumstances, the judge will likely extend it. You're his safest option, I nodded, signing each line without hesitation. I'd signed 1,000 documents in my life bills, mortgage papers, checks, but never one that carried such quiet weight. When we returned home, Elias was in the living room kneeling over the chessboard Gareth had set up. Grandpa's teaching me how the horses move, he announced proudly. They're knights, Gareth corrected with a smile. They move in L shapes just like life, never straight, always around something. The boy laughed, his small hands clumsy but determined, as he captured one of Gareth's pawns. The sound filled the room, fragile and bright. I stood in the doorway holding the signed papers and felt a peace I hadn't known in years settle over the house. That evening, while cleaning up after dinner, I found the red toy car sitting on the kitchen table left there like a bookmark in our story. Its paint was dulled, one wheel slightly crooked, but it gleamed under the warm light. I picked it up and turned it over in my palm, the faint scratch marks along its side catching under my fingertips. I thought of everything it had survived. Careless hands, hard floors, a world it hadn't asked to understand, and realized it had outlasted more than I ever expected. When I placed it back on the table, Gareth came to stand beside me. Elias was in the next room, humming softly to himself as he arranged his chess pieces for another round. Feels like we've been given a second chance, Gareth murmured. Not given, I said quietly. Earned. Outside, dusk gathered around the edges of the window, the sky deep and still. Inside our home, breathed again, slower, steadier, alive. And at the center of it all was the child who stayed, his laughter stitching together what love had broken one small sound at a time. By late summer, the house had settled into its new rhythm. The scent of cut grass drifted in through the open porch windows, and the air hummed with the sound of crickets. Evening light stretched long across the Hudson, turning the river into a ribbon of bronze. It was the hour I'd always loved most, when the world quiets and even old pain starts to sound like memory instead of loss. Gareth had hung the new wind chimes that week. They were made from the spare car keys we'd found in the junk drawer, the old station wagon, the first house, the sedan we sold when we retired. Now they dangled from the porch beam, catching every bit of breeze and turning it into a soft, metallic song. I liked the way they sounded. Not mournful, not bright, but steady, like forgiveness without forgetting. Elias was chasing fireflies in the yard, his laughter carrying through the warm air. He'd grown bolder these past few months, less afraid to speak up, quicker to smile. Sometimes I caught glimpses of Corinne in him, the tilt of his head when he was curious, the way he chewed on his pencil when thinking. It hurt, but it also healed something in me, knowing that what was good in her had found a way to continue through him. I sat with my journal on my lap, the pages half filled with uneven handwriting and tea stains. The last few months had been a blur of court hearings, therapy sessions, school forms, and quiet evenings where we taught Elias to pray before bed. Corinne's sentencing had come and gone. 18 months in federal custody. Mara, too. I hadn't gone to the trial. I couldn't. But I wrote to her once, a letter that began with love and ended with boundaries. I told her that Elias was safe, that we'd keep his life steady, that I hoped she would one day find the courage to rebuild her own. I never got a reply, but that was all right. Some silences carry their own kind of peace. When the sun dipped lower, Gareth joined me on the porch with 2 mugs of chamomile tea. He sat beside me without speaking, watching the boy dart through the twilight, cupping his hands around the faint glow of fireflies. We'd both aged years in months, but there was calm in the weariness now, like survivors who finally made it to shore. "Do you ever think," Gareth said after a while, "that love's biggest test isn't how much we give, but how much we stop giving?" I smiled faintly, closing my journal. Maybe that's how it saves us. The wind chimes stirred again, a small, deliberate sound that seemed to echo the thought. I opened to the final page and wrote slowly, the ink bleeding a little from my unsteady hand. Love built me. Boundaries saved me. I set the pen down and watched the words dry in the fading light. Out in the yard, Elias lifted his hands and released the fireflies, their tiny lights drifting upward, like prayers too gentle to be spoken aloud. Gareth reached for my hand. We sat there listening to the soft metallic song above us, the quiet rush of the river beyond the pulse of a world that somehow had found its balance again. For the first time in a long time, peace didn't feel borrowed. It felt earned.